At 68 years old, Leonard "Lenny" Brooks was supposed to be done with violence. For 16 seasons, he had been one of the most feared safeties in the NFL, breaking up passes, breaking bones, and walking off the field to the roar of stadium crowds. Now, his days were supposed to be quiet. Golf in Florida, alumni events, and a pension that would take care of him until the end of his life. Instead, one November night, police would find Lenny in a suburban kitchen, covered in blood, standing over the body of his 31-year-old fiancée. In his bank accounts, there would be almost nothing. His entire NFL pension, decades of hits, surgeries, and pain, would be gone. Before this story unravels, subscribe and stay with this video until the end. What happens to Lenny Brooks could happen to anyone who thinks age and money make them safe. Lenny's name used to mean something. He had played for a major market franchise in the 1980s and early 1990s, made multiple Pro Bowls, and been part of one unforgettable championship run. He never became a Hall of Famer, but he became the kind of player fans recognized in old highlight reels. Number 27, helmet low, launching into receivers across the middle. The NFL years left scars. His knees were wrecked. His right shoulder never fully healed. Headaches came and went in waves. But they also left him with something else. A lifetime pension from the league and benefits through the Players' Union, part of broader systems set up for retired players who had given their bodies to the sport. It wasn't billionaire money, but it was enough. Combined with a modest house outside Tampa and a few endorsement deals from the past, Lenny could live comfortably. But comfort comes with something dangerous: loneliness. His first marriage ended in the late 1990s. His second ended quietly 15 years later. His kids lived in other states, busy with their own lives. As the years passed, the phone rang less often. Invitations slowed. Old teammates died or disappeared into their own private struggles. Lenny started spending more time online. That is where he first saw her. Her name was Camille Hart. She was 31, a fitness influencer with carefully curated social media profiles and a story that sounded both tragic and inspiring. She posted about growing up poor, working 3 jobs, building a self-made brand in wellness and financial literacy. Her photos showed designer clothes, luxury hotel lobbies, and motivational quotes about never settling for less. There were also pictures of her training clients and speaking at small events. To most people, she was just another face in a feed. To a retired man scrolling alone at midnight, she looked like possibility. The first contact was simple. Lenny liked one of Camille's posts about late bloomers and left a short comment about starting over in your 60s. She replied with a heart and a thank you. A day later, she sent him a private message. Camille told Lenny she recognized his name from old NFL clips. Her father had been a fan, she said, and they used to watch throwback games together when she was young. Whether that story was true or not, it was exactly what Lenny wanted to hear. For the first time in a long time, someone seemed genuinely interested in who he used to be. Their conversations moved quickly, from public comments to direct messages, from messages to phone calls, from phone calls to video chats. Camille called him Len after a week. She told him he looked distinguished, not old. She laughed at his stories from the locker room, even the ones he had told 100 times. She also talked about herself, about surviving bad relationships, about a fiancé who had cheated on her, about working 3 jobs to support a sick mother. Every detail made her sound both vulnerable and strong. It was a script carefully designed to disarm a man like Lenny, wealthy enough to help, lonely enough to want to, proud enough to believe he could be someone's hero again. If you know someone older with money and loneliness, keep watching. This story shows exactly how predators build their trap. After 3 months of long-distance contact, Lenny flew her to Florida. She arrived at the airport in jeans, a simple shirt, and white sneakers, looking younger than her photos, but just as polished. In person, she was even better at reading him. knowing when to touch his arm, when to compliment his old highlights, when to listen quietly as he talked about teammates who were now dead or broke. Within days, she moved into his house, temporarily. She said her lease back home was ending, that she wanted a new start. Lenny told himself it was crazy, that the age gap was huge. But when she called him my old lion and said she felt safe with him, the doubts faded. Soon, neighbors saw them together at the grocery store, at local diners, at the gym where Camille started training clients. People stared at the unlikely couple, a 68-year-old former NFL player with a limp and a much younger woman in athletic wear, always carefully put together. Some whispered. Some rolled their eyes. Lenny chose not to see any of it. Within a year, she wore an engagement ring. They talked about a small ceremony. She posted photos of them with captions about proving love has no age limit. The comments were mixed, some supportive, some accusing her of chasing money. Publicly, she brushed it off. Privately, those doubts didn't matter. By then, she had already started asking questions that had nothing to do with love. How much was his pension, exactly? Which bank handled the deposits? Did he have anyone else on his accounts? How did his NFL benefits work? Lenny, used to being open about money in locker rooms and agent meetings, answered without hesitation. He didn't see the pattern. He didn't know she had done versions of this before, with smaller men, smaller accounts, lower stakes. This time, the stakes were everything he had left. Financial abuse rarely looks like a movie montage. It starts with small favors, framed as practical improvements. Camille offered to organize Lenny's bills. She said online banking was safer than the way he did things. She offered to help him avoid getting taken advantage of by other people. Within months, she had access to his email, his online banking, and his NFL pension portal. She claimed it made things easier for him. And at first, it did. Bills were paid on time. Automatic withdrawals were set up. Lenny felt looked after in a way he hadn't felt in years. Then came the investment opportunities. Camille told Lenny she knew a financial advisor who specialized in helping athletes protect their money from scams and bad deals, similar to real cases where high-profile athletes had been defrauded by supposed advisors. She said they could grow his pension through low-risk, high-yield instruments. Lenny didn't understand the details, but he trusted her judgment. He signed what she put in front of him. What he was really signing were authorizations. Authorizations to transfer chunks of his pension into shell companies. Authorizations to move money into accounts controlled only by Camille. Authorizations to grant her power to act on his behalf in certain financial matters. Each step looked legitimate on paper. Each document was dressed in legal language and digital logos. Over a year, the slow bleed became a hemorrhage. Lenny's monthly statements changed. Deposits were still coming in, but large transfers flowed out almost immediately. To entities he didn't recognize, Heart Wellness Consulting, CH Legacy Holdings, and other names that sounded professional but were nothing more than empty shells. Camille explained everything with a smile. She said they were restructuring for tax purposes. She said this was how wealthy people protected themselves. She reminded him of real stories where athletes lost everything to bad advisors, promising she was doing the opposite, protecting him. If you're watching this thinking, I'd never fall for that, remember, scams don't work on stupid people. They work on trusting people. Keep watching. The first time Lenny really felt something was wrong was small. His card got declined at a restaurant. Camille laughed it off, saying the bank probably flagged a purchase. She offered to pay. The next day, she said it was fixed. For a while, things went back to normal. Then property taxes came due. The notice showed a past due balance. Lenny called the county, confused. Payments hadn't been made for several months. When he confronted Camille, she had an answer ready. She blamed a system change with the bank and said she would fix it. She did fix it, with his remaining liquid savings. Weeks later, an alumni coordinator called about an event and mentioned, offhand, that some retired players were having issues with shady advisors and pension allocations. That planted a seed. Lenny started asking more questions. He logged into an account Camille hadn't fully locked down and saw numbers that made no sense. His main pension reserve, money built over decades, was almost gone. The explanation this time was different. Camille stopped pretending it was an error. Instead, she told a new story. She had used the money to set up businesses for their future, to invest in opportunities, to make sure he didn't run out. When he asked where those assets were, there were no clear answers. The realization came slow and then all at once. He had been scammed. Not by a stranger in another country. By the woman who slept in his bed, wore his ring, and called him "my old lion." After the truth landed, the house in Tampa felt like a crime scene, even before any actual blood was spilled. Every room contained memories that now felt false. Every photo on the wall looked like evidence of a long con. Lenny met quietly with a lawyer recommended by an old teammate. The news was blunt. Much of the money was gone, moved through layers of accounts that would be hard to unwind. The documents he had signed made any legal fight slow and uncertain. Technically, in many places, he had consented. Financial predators count on exactly that kind of loophole. At the same time, he spoke to an advisor from the Players Association. The man explained that while there had been real-life fraud schemes targeting former players, bogus health reimbursement claims, fake investment opportunities, most of those involved criminal advisors, not romantic partners. In Lenny's case, law enforcement might see it as a domestic financial dispute unless clear criminal fraud could be proven. In other words, he had been wiped out, and there was no guarantee anyone would go to prison for it. At home, tension thickened. Camille noticed the change in him. He became quieter. His routines shifted. He began locking certain drawers, making calls outside. She responded not with fear, but with cold calculation. She tried to preempt his moves, suggesting they reset, talking about selling the house, even floating the idea of moving to another state for a fresh start. Beneath the surface, both of them were planning. For Lenny, the breaking point wasn't a single moment. It was cumulative. The knee pain when he got out of bed, the medical records listing concussions, the memories of teammates who died broke or damaged, all against the image of this young woman calmly draining the last thing he had left that felt like a reward for his sacrifices. He pulled out old boxes one night, game programs, clippings, photos. In one, he was 23, helmet off, smiling with blood on his lip. The caption described him as fearless. He stared at it for a long time and asked himself an ugly question. Had he gone from fearless to helpless? If you're still here, hit like. The next part of this story is where everything snaps, and it all happens in a matter of minutes. In the days that followed, the arguments between them escalated. Not screaming matches, but controlled, sharp exchanges. He asked direct questions. She dodged, minimized, or flipped blame back onto him. You signed everything. You wanted this lifestyle. You're just scared of being old and alone. The more he pushed, the more he realized something chilling. She felt no real remorse. To her, this was just business. Friends later said Lenny had started talking differently. One described him as too calm. Another said he sounded like a man who had made some kind of decision and was just waiting to act on it. Nobody imagined what that decision actually was. On a cool night in late November, before December 2nd, 2025, the tension finally turned into action. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening. The kind that happens in thousands of homes across Florida every night. Dinner, television, the quiet hum of appliances, the distant sound of neighbors closing garage doors. But inside Lenny Brooks's house on a cool night in late November, before December 2nd, 2025, The air felt different. Heavier. Like the pressure before a storm that never quite breaks until it does, all at once. Lenny cooked dinner that night. Simple food. Grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, rice. The same kind of clean meals he used to eat during training camp, when every calorie had a purpose and every plate was calculated. He moved through the kitchen slowly, his right knee stiff from old injuries, his hands steady despite the tremor that had started appearing in recent months, a side effect, doctors said, of too many hits to the head over too many years. Camille sat at the dining table, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when he placed the plate in front of her. She picked at the food with her fork, pushing pieces around without much interest. Her attention was elsewhere, on messages, on posts, on a digital world where she was always performing, always curating, always one step ahead of whoever might be watching. At one point, she laughed at something on the screen. A genuine laugh, the kind she used to give him in those early months when she made him believe he still mattered. Now, that sound felt like mockery. Lenny set his fork down and stared at her for a long moment. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care anymore. After dinner, they moved to the living room in silence. The television played a Monday night game. Two teams Lenny didn't recognize, filled with players younger than some of his own children. The commentators talked about speed, about new generation athletes, about how the game had evolved beyond the brutal physicality of earlier decades. Every word reminded Lenny of what he had been and what he would never be again. Camille sat on the far end of the couch with her laptop open, reviewing spreadsheets. She called them business projections. Lenny now knew they were nothing more than documentation of theft, tracking which accounts still had money to drain, which shell companies could be dissolved, which next steps would cover her tracks. He stood without saying anything and walked down the hallway toward his bedroom. The house was laid out in a way that made every room feel isolated from the others. High ceilings, long corridors, the kind of design that looks impressive in photos but feels lonely when you actually live in it. At the end of the hall, his bedroom door stood half open. Inside, the closet. On the top shelf, pushed behind old shoe boxes and folded sweaters, a small lockbox. Lenny pulled it down and sat on the edge of the bed, holding it in both hands. The metal was cold. He opened it slowly. Inside, a 9mm handgun he had purchased years earlier after a minor break-in at a previous house. He had gone to the range a few times after buying it, then put it away and mostly forgotten about it. Legal. Registered. Rarely touched. He held the weapon for a long time, feeling its weight. In his playing days, he had made decisions in fractions of a second, reading offensive formations, adjusting angles, launching his body at full speed toward a target. Those decisions had been instinctive, trained into muscle memory through thousands of repetitions. This decision was different. This was slow, deliberate, the product of weeks of realization, days of quiet rage, and hours of understanding that no legal system, no lawyer, no amount of explanation would give him back what had been taken. If you're still watching, hit like now. What happens in the next few minutes will show you how fast a life can end, and how much damage can be done in the time it takes to pull a trigger. He loaded the gun. 6 rounds. His hands did not shake. He stood and walked back down the hallway, moving quietly despite the limp in his gait. He passed family photos on the walls, pictures of his children when they were young, team photos from championship seasons, images of a life that now felt like it belonged to someone else. In the living room, he first walked to the television and turned it off. The sudden silence made Camille look up, confused. The game had been background noise, and its absence felt like a shift in the room's atmosphere. She started to ask something, then stopped when she saw his face. Lenny stood a few feet away, the gun held low at his side. Not pointed at her yet. Just there. Visible. Camille's expression shifted, from confusion to alarm to something colder. Not quite fear. More like calculation. She had been in bad situations before. She knew how to read people, how to adjust her tone, how to find the angle that diffused tension. She closed the laptop slowly and set it aside. "Len," she said carefully, "what are you doing?" "I know what you did," he said. His voice was flat. No anger. No shouting. Just a statement of fact. "We can talk about this," she said, standing slowly, keeping her hands visible, her body language non-threatening. "I know you're upset. I know things got complicated. But we can fix this. We can sit down and—" "You took everything." The words came out slow, deliberate. 16 years I played. 16 years of surgeries, concussions, broken bones. And the one thing I got out of it, the one thing that was supposed to last, you took it all." Camille's jaw tightened. The performance dropped slightly, replaced by something sharper. "You signed the papers, Lenny. You agreed to everything. I didn't hold a gun to your head." The irony of that phrase hung in the air. She continued, her voice rising slightly. "You wanted to feel young again. You wanted someone who made you feel important. I gave you that. And now you're going to blame me because you didn't read the fine print." Lenny raised the gun. Camille's eyes widened. She took a step back, her heel catching on the edge of the coffee table. "Len, wait. Think about what you're doing. You're not a killer. You're not." He fired. The first shot hit her in the chest. The sound was deafening in the small room, louder than he remembered from the range. Camille stumbled backward, her hands going to the wound, her mouth opening in shock. She tried to say something, but no words came out. She fell against the couch, then slid to the floor. Her laptop tumbled off the cushions and landed beside her, the screen still glowing with spreadsheets full of stolen money. Lenny fired twice more. Once to the torso. Once to the side of her head as she lay motionless. Not out of rage. Out of certainty. He had spent his entire career finishing plays, making sure the job was done. This was no different. The room fell silent except for a ringing in his ears. Smoke hung in the air. The smell of gunpowder mixed with something metallic and wrong. Camille lay still, her eyes open, staring at nothing. Lenny stood there for several seconds, the gun still in his hand, his breathing steady. Then he walked slowly to the kitchen, set the weapon on the counter a short distance away, and sat down at the table. His hands, now covered in splattered blood from standing too close, rested flat on the surface. He stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. He did not call anyone. He did not run. He simply sat and waited for the inevitable. Outside, a neighbor walking their dog heard the shots. At first, they mistook them for fireworks, someone celebrating early, maybe. But then came the silence. The kind of silence that feels wrong. The neighbor called 911 at 9:47 p.m. Police arrived 8 minutes later, surrounding the house with lights and drawn weapons. They found the front door unlocked. Inside, they found a young woman dead in the living room and an old man sitting in the kitchen, covered in blood, staring at his hands. When officers approached with guns raised, Lenny did not resist. He simply looked up and nodded, as if he had been expecting them. One officer later described his expression as empty. Not remorseful, not defiant, just blank. Like someone watching a game that was already over and knowing there was no point in arguing with the final score. They read him his rights. He said he understood. They cuffed him and led him out to a patrol car. As they drove away, one officer sitting beside him in the back seat later reported that Lenny said only one thing during the entire ride to the station. "She took my whole life before I took hers." News of the killing spread fast. By the next morning, Lenny Brooks, number 27, Pro Bowl safety, championship winner, was a headline again. But this time, the footage was not from a stadium. It was from a quiet suburban street, Police tape stretched across a driveway, cameras capturing the fall of a legend. Commentators debated how a beloved veteran could end up accused of murder at 68. Some pointed to cognitive decline and chronic traumatic encephalopathy from repeated head trauma. Others focused on the financial exploitation, noting that retired athletes remain prime targets for romance scams and pension fraud, with real cases showing millions stolen from former players by advisors, partners, and con artists. Investigators pieced together the trail quickly. Bank records showed Lenny's NFL pension redirected into shell companies controlled by Camille, Heart Wellness Consulting, CH Legacy Holdings, entities that existed only on paper. Digital forensics revealed she had done versions of this before with smaller targets in other states. Lenny had simply been her biggest score. But the evidence of financial exploitation did not change the legal reality. A 31-year-old woman was dead, shot 3 times at close range. Prosecutors argued premeditation, the retrieval of the gun, the loading, the walk back to the living room. These were not the actions of temporary rage. These were calculated decisions. The defense painted Lenny as a victim pushed past the breaking point. They brought in experts on brain trauma, chronic pain, and depression common among former players. They explained how Camille had systematically drained his pension using tactics seen in real fraud cases targeting vulnerable athletes. When she took his financial security, she erased the meaning of decades of sacrifice, every hit, every surgery, every broken bone. Without the pension, the pain had been for nothing. The trial lasted 4 weeks. The jury deliberated 14 hours. The verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Lenny to 25 years to life. At 68, it was a death sentence. He would die in prison. In a brief statement before sentencing, Lenny addressed the court without apology. "I spent 16 years getting hit so hard I can't remember my kids' birthdays. I did it because the pension made it worth something." When she took that, she didn't just take money. She took the reason I suffered. "I know what I did was wrong. But I won't pretend I regret it." The courtroom was silent. As for the money, it was gone. The accounts Camille created were empty or closed. Funds vanished through international transfers that would never be recovered. Lenny's entire pension, decades of pain, hits, and sacrifice, was lost forever. The case sent shockwaves through the NFL alumni community. Seminars on fraud prevention began prominently featuring cases like Brooks. The Players Association updated educational materials and offered free consultations with elder law specialists. But the fundamental problem remained. Aging athletes with money and loneliness make easy targets. Lenny's house sat empty for months before an investor bought it at a steep discount. To the buyer, it was just a property. To everyone else, it was where a legend became a cautionary tale. Leonard Brooks, number 27, had once been defined by bone-crushing hits that sent receivers sprawling and crowds roaring. Now, he would be remembered for 3 shots fired in a quiet living room on a November night, ending a life and destroying his own. The woman who scammed him is dead. The money is gone. And the man who gave his body to a brutal sport will spend whatever time he has left behind bars, another name in a long list of players whose stories end far from the stadium lights. Love did not destroy Leonard Brooks. Loneliness did. Pride did. And a predator who understood exactly how to turn those vulnerabilities into profit, until the cost became something she could never repay. If this story made you think about someone you know, an aging parent, a retired friend, someone with money and isolation, share this video. Romance scams targeting older adults are rising every year, and athletes are especially vulnerable. Subscribe for more true crime stories that show how easily trust can be weaponized. Thanks for watching.